Hi everyone, Ulster Expat here. Yep, the videos are coming thick and fast now. Getting on a roll, striking while the iron is hot. I think my latest video, what I wanted to put up was really what would be my top 5 tips for homebrewing. Really coming at it from the angle of, if I was to start now and knowing what I know now, when I was starting homebrewing, what would I do, or what would be my top 5 tips for anyone starting out? So, this it's been done a million times over, but it's always good for new perspectives. Probably a lot of what I'm going to say is probably quite repetitive, and if it's quite repetitive, then it means that it's it's good, good advice. If you're getting the same advice from multiple sources, then that can't be a bad thing. So yeah, my top 5 tips for home brewing. So here goes. So the first one, really, really basic one, but get into temperature control as quickly as possible. So I've done a video there of a review of my brewing space, so you can see there that I've got a fermentation fridge. But yeah, if you have the space, if you have the money, and even then you don't need to have that much money. If you could pick up a second-hand fridge and a temperature controller and a patio heater, you can do it for. I would imagine you can do it for well under £100. But yeah, temperature control is the biggest step up in quality that I certainly saw in my early stages of homebrewing. You go from getting that that unmistakable homebrew twang through where you get stressed yeast throwing out off flavors. Even if you're doing it in an airing cupboard or something, in that critical stage where the yeast is really going at it, hammer and tong. You really want stable temperature control there. So yeah, invest in whatever. There are multiple ways you can do temperature control, but the easiest and the most, certainly the most widely practiced in the homebrewing community, is to get yourself a fridge. Attach up a patio heater and an Inkbird temperature controller, set it to 20 degrees, and Bob's your uncle. So yeah, the biggest step up in quality in my beer was certainly whenever I did that. you know the downside is not so much the cost, because I mean the cost, okay, cost of living crisis, everyone's struggling, but it's in the grand scheme of what you can spend in homebrewing. Temperature control is not one of the big ticket items, but certainly is having space, because I know I certainly before I had this dedicated space, I did have temperature control, but it involved having a fridge in my dining room, which went down like a sack of spuds with the missus. So yeah, if you can do it, there are multiple videos out there on YouTube. Just Google it and do it. But it certainly will be the one thing that you see the biggest step up in quality of your beer. My second piece of advice would be, really, if you have one nearby, join a homebrew club. I joined during COVID. I think certainly the first couple of meetings I did were remote, but then subsequently we got into in-person meetings, and they really are a font of useful information. Your mates, maybe into beer, or family maybe into beer, and they will give you feedback, might give you positive feedback for fear of hurting your feelings. I can certainly vouch for the fact that if you join your local homebrew club, you will get some pretty frank and honest feedback, which again is one of the biggest things that can help you improve your beer. Because if you don't know that you're doing something wrong, or then you're not going to be able to go back and work on it and improve it. So really, really good feedback and advice from your homebrew club. And again, it's a forum for you to chat beer. How many of you have got mates that aren't into beer, that are just like, oh, here Richard goes on again, like rabbiting on about like craft beer, etc. You go to a homebrew club, then you have that group of people that you just want to talk about beer, and you get advice, you hear how different people do things. There are a million ways to brew beer. There's certainly not one set way to do it, and there's four, five, six different methods for everything. So if educate yourself, and and hear back from feedback from people. And some people, certainly in the club that I'm in, Scottish Craft Brewers, big thumbs up and shout out to them. They really are really, really experienced homebrewers, and far more experienced than I am. So really is really is a font of knowledge. Tip number 3 is competitions. Enter competitions. I said this in my previous video. Aside from it being actually just really quite exciting to enter your beer into a competition, it can be quite nerve-wracking too, because you're putting yourself out there, and your beer out there, and you're sort of setting yourself up literally to be judged. But again, in terms of like feedback, and most competitions will give you a detailed score sheet, with a score out of 50 per the sort of standard BJCP scoring guidelines. But you will get feedback, and you will get feedback on what was good about the beer. You'll get feedback on about maybe what was not so good about the beer, and actually, really, really importantly, you will actually get suggestions for improvement. So again, there's a bit of faff to competitions. You have to be able to bottle your beer. You have to then package it up. You have to send it. It's not cheap postage sometimes, especially when you get to the weights of multiple bottles of beer. It can cost you, well, it can cost you about £20, let's say, to enter a competition. So if you're doing that regularly, it all adds up. But again, in terms of feedback is what I'd say. And it's just, I just find it really, really enjoyable. I get good scores, I get bad scores. Certainly the one rosette that I do have shows the benefit of entering the same beer in multiple competitions. So the beer I won my 3rd place for in the BrewCon 5 in 2022, I had actually entered that into the London Amateur Brewers homebrew competition prior to that one, and it got panned. I mean, maybe it didn't get panned, but I think I scored 30 out of 50, which is not a bad score, but got pretty significant feedback on some of the fruity esters they were getting from. It was a Vienna lager, actually, so just to put it into context, it was getting some feedback on fruity esters that you shouldn't really get in a Vienna lager. And lo and behold, I went back and looked at my notes, and for whatever reason, I'd fermented it at about 14 degrees, and therefore you get fruity esters when you're fermenting a lager, sort of traditional, with using traditional lager yeast at 14 degrees. So I was able to go back and rebrew the same recipe, but then adjust my fermentation schedule. And lo and behold, I think I went from a score of about 30 out of 50 to a score of 41 out of 50, and got the rosette as a reward. So again, I mean, lots of these things, or lots of these pieces of advice I'm probably giving are around about enabling yourself to get feedback, and enable you to then sort of enact improvements and get better and better. The fourth one, my fourth tip would be keep good and detailed notes. So to sort of flop back to that last point around my feedback from the 2 times that I entered that Vienna lager into competitions. I was able to go back to because I keep sort of quite good and detailed notes, and I do a mixture of things. I have a notepad where I will write down with pen and paper. But I also maintain records on Brewfather. I brew all my batches through Brewfather, and that enables me to see the recipes and see exactly what I've done. But yeah, but because I had, detailed notes about, what temperatures, I'd done everything that in terms of mashing temperatures and fermentation temperatures, I was able to then, subsequently go back and say, well, in the case of my Vienna lager, oh yes, of course, right, I can see that I, fermented that at 14 degrees. So I need to go and ferment it. I think I fermented it second time round at 9 degrees, and that, subsequently made all the difference. So, detail notes are good because, the better you have good brew days, you have bad brew days. Sometimes, absolutely everything goes wrong, and, if, you may not always remember what happened in a particular brew day, especially if you're brewing quite often. So it's always good to have, those detailed notes to go back and, make a note of, well, what went well in the brew day, or what went bad, what went wrong in the brew day. And that way, if you do get feedback on a particular type of beer, you might be able to go back and, forensically look at it and say, right, well, I've got an off flavor because of X, Y, or Z. So, detailed brew notes are, a godsend when it comes to sort of reviewing things and seeing how you might be able to do things better. So that brings me to my last one, and this might be controversial. But if you're starting out, or if you're brewing at the moment, and you're, say for example, you're doing extract kits and you're bottling, so this is a 2-for-1 tip. I would say get onto all grain brewing as quickly as possible, and get into kegging as quickly as possible. So all grain brewing, I think, okay, there are massive improvements in the quality of dry malt extract, or the kits that you use. But again, in terms of being able to get the quality of your beer up to where it, can be, mistaken for commercial beers, you got to get away from kits, because they will give that unmistakable homebrewy twang to your beer. People may disagree with me on that, but that's certainly been my experience. And then secondly, get into kegging as quickly as possible. Again, there's a big caveat to that. Kegging is not cheap. So, much as I would say, with my first point, where I don't think temperature control is that expensive, I don't think there's any getting away from the fact that, the initial layout, or layout outlay for kegging is not cheap. Even second hand kegs are probably upwards of about 50 or 60 quid. Then you've got to get a gas bottle. CO2 supplies aren't exactly cheap either. You've got to get taps. You've got to get all the fixtures and fittings, and then you've got to find, either a freezer or a fridge to convert into either a keezer or a kegerator. But what I would say about kegging is that the first time that you keg a beer versus the last time that you had to bottle a full batch, say if you're doing a 19-liter batch, which is, upwards of about 50 330 ml bottles, the amount of time that you spend, washing the bottles, sterilizing the bottles, getting everything set up, and then going on to filling the bottles and capping the bottles. I remember that, where I had been previously bottling, and then went on to kegging, and I still had to wash the keg, I still had to sterilize the keg, but I washed and sterilized and filled the keg all within about 25 minutes. Sealed it up, put it onto the gas, and was like, oh my goodness, why have I not been doing this for so long? So, there are exceptions to it. There are beers that benefit from being bottle conditioned in the bottle. Big strong dark beers. You would say some Belgian styles, really benefit from being in a bottle. But on by and large, I would say, you know if you can get into kegging, I would recommend it. Because it just life's too short to be bottling, to be brutally honest. So yes, those are my 5 tips. So I don't think there's anything groundbreaking there, but it may help to sort of push you along in the journey if you've heard things over and over again. If so, you hear, oh, the guys are banging on about the same things. So yeah, again, just a little bit of a thing. I am trying to keep these videos to 10 minutes. I'm not managing it yet, so they're usually about 12 to 15. This is probably going to be on to 16 minutes. So hopefully you find that content useful. Again, if you like the content, please click like and subscribe onto the YouTube channel. Again, going to try and keep these videos churning out with minimal editing and no frills YouTubing, as they say. So thank you very much again for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye bye.